The massive, unpainted warship didn't even slow down. It rammed directly into the pulsing center of the biological fleet, metal shrieking against chitin, and detonated its payload. A kinetic shockwave ripped through the vacuum, bright enough to blind. What kind of species used themselves as the bullet? If you want to witness how the galaxy learned to fear humanity, lock in and subscribe to the channel before the shockwave hits. The diplomatic translation crystal resting on her desk had been perfectly intact then, 72 hours before the sky burned. Captain Veda Corinne had been staring at a much smaller screen. The final transmission from the Outer Edge Research Outpost hadn't contained words, only the wet, tearing sounds of a planetary crust being consumed. Veda stood in the dim command center, her chest tight, watching the tactical hologram. The Void Swarm fleet pulsed in sickly crimson light, a biological tide eating its way toward the Valerian home world. Counselor Oris's voice echoed from the secondary comms, thin and trembling. 72 hours. That was the deadline. If they couldn't secure military aid from the wider galaxy by then, the Council would broadcast a system-wide surrender. A futile gesture, Veda knew. You couldn't surrender to a predator that only saw you as calories. She picked up the translation crystal. It was smooth, cool, and flawless, a tool meant for nuanced debate and peaceful integration. Valerians were scholars, builders. They had no vocabulary for total annihilation. The crystal felt useless in her palm, heavy with impending failure. Divert it, Veda ordered softly, not taking her eyes off the crimson tide. Across the room, Dr. Alara hesitated, her fingers hovering above the primary controls. Captain, if I drain the emergency power grid to boost the array, life support on the lower decks drops to critical. Do it, Veda said, the words tasting like ash. The swarm won't leave anyone alive to need life support anyway. The deck plates vibrated under Veda's boots as the station's reserves were violently rerouted. The soft, ambient light of the command center died, leaving only the harsh glare of the tactical map and the blinding white spike of the communications array charging. They were throwing a desperate plea into the uncharted territories, into the dark. Signal is away, Alara whispered, the hum of the dying generators whining in the background. The silence that followed was heavier than the impending doom. So hit subscribe to find out exactly what was waiting in that silence. They waited. Hours bled away, marked only by the dropping temperature of the station and the metallic taste of recycled air growing stale. The crimson dots on the hologram swelled, crossing the inner system perimeter. The Valerian defense line, built for stray asteroids and minor piracy, evaporated against the swarm's vanguard. Veda gripped the edge of the console, the sharp edges digging into her palms. Her breath hitched as she watched the inevitable. She expected civilized saviors to answer the call. A coalition fleet of advanced, elegant energy ships projecting shields and logic. Instead, the orbital sensors screamed as a massive slipspace rupture tore open the vacuum just above the planet's atmosphere. The vessels that emerged were hideous. They were brutal, blocky constructs of dark, scarred metal, completely devoid of aesthetic grace. They bristled with crude, physical projectile cannons and thick armor plating. They broadcast no greeting. They offered no terms of alliance. They broadcast a plea into the dark, and the dark answered with warships. To defeat a monster that consumed worlds, it seemed the galaxy required a species that had perfected war. Before Veda could even process their designation, Terran, the ugly Vanguard ships accelerated. Veda's breath caught in her throat. The Terran Vanguard didn't bother with elegant energy nets or focused plasma lances. They fired solid, dense slugs of heavy metal. The kinetic impacts were devastating, physically tearing through the swarm's chitinous scout vessels with savage, unrefined efficiency. On the glowing tactical hologram, the perfectly synchronized crimson dots began to violently scatter. The Terran comms suddenly bled over the open channels. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a psychological assault of deafening, rhythmic war drums and jagged, ear-splitting static. Heavy boarding torpedoes, a concept completely foreign to Valerian doctrine, slammed into the flanks of the larger biological cruisers. Veda watched her tactical display glitch as the swarm's flawless hive-mind coordination fractured into localized panic. But the main swarm armada was still too vast. The Crimson Tide surged forward, ready to swallow the Terran flanks. It was a mathematical certainty. The mammalian fleet would be overwhelmed. Then, the largest of the Terran dreadnoughts broke formation. Its engines flared, propelling it forward on a suicide trajectory. The massive warship struck the pulsing center of the swarm. The resulting shockwave rattled Veda's teeth against her jaw, vibrating through the deck plates. The detonation wasn't just a single bomb. It was a payload of thousands of kinetic kill vehicles. They rippled outward with the force of nuclear fire, shredding the biological fleet from the inside out. The overwhelming Crimson Tide on the hologram simply vanished, replaced by the cool, empty blue of clear space. The surviving outer tendrils of the swarm, abruptly blind and leaderless, broke off and fled back toward the galactic core. Hours later, Admiral Thorne's face appeared on the main communication screen, scarred, unsmiling, and terrifyingly human. When Counselor Oris stammered an offer of their most advanced fusion schematics in exchange for the rescue, Thorne abruptly cut him off. He declared the Valerian sector under absolute Terran protection. No payment required. Veda stood alone on the observation deck, feeling the faint, rhythmic vibration of Terran patrol fleets guarding the local space lanes. She held the smooth, flawless diplomatic translation crystal in her palm. It was cold against her skin, a tool built for peace and understanding. But as the massive, angular shadow of a Terran destroyer eclipsed the nearby star, she realized the crystal was entirely useless now. The galaxy didn't need translation. It understood violence perfectly. The Valerians survived, but what happens when your protectors are the most dangerous apex predators in the universe? Subscribe to uncover the next chapter of human expansion tomorrow.